Draconic Astrology. This is the study of the personality of your soul. Now, I want to thank Day for introducing me to Draconic Astrology because I had not heard of it before, and she said that it would probably be something that I would really enjoy. So I looked it up, studied it, learned about it, and it is absolutely something that I think is so cool, so interesting, and just gives you a different way of thinking about your natal chart or your astrology chart and the meanings and all of that stuff. So if you don't know anything about astrology, there might be some things that are a little bit more advanced in this class. If you do know some stuff about astrology, then you should be just fine, but I will try my best to explain things as we go along. And if you have questions, please pop it into the chat or unmute yourself and speak up, let me know, because I want this to be, kind of interactive and fun and all of that stuff. And so if you have questions, just let me know. What is Draconic Astrology? Draconic Astrology is a natal chart that is focused on the placement of the North Node. So what makes Draconic Astrology different than just looking up a normal birth chart is that the North Node is what sets the chart. So essentially, they want the North Node to be placed at 0 degrees of Aries. Because Aries is the first sign of the zodiac, it represents kind of like the beginning of your evolution, essentially. And the North Node and the South Node play karmic roles in your astrology energy. And so when we place the North Node at the beginning of Aries, it's kind of like giving everybody a starting point. And so when you place your North Node there, it shifts everything in that chart. The houses and the aspects stay the same as your natal chart, which we'll see in just a little bit, but the signs may change. And if you are someone whose North Node already is Aries, you may not see a huge difference in your chart. And essentially what that means is that your soul chose for you to live out this lifetime pretty much similar to its own personality as a soul. Where it'll be really different is if your North Node falls into any other sign, and then it's going to shift your chart accordingly. So the Draconic chart is said to represent the true essence of your soul. So kind of thinking of it like your soul's personality. And a lot of times, at least from what I read online, is that if you don't quite resonate with the energy of your natal chart, you might actually resonate a lot with your Draconic chart. And that's because it's considered like your soul's personality. It's like who your soul is, and then your natal chart becomes the energy of that specific lifetime. So because we live many lifetimes, you'll have different birthdays, different moon signs, different rising signs. And so you'll be living out that energy of that natal chart. But your Draconic chart pretty much stays the same because it's who you are as the soul. Now, the word Draconic means like a dragon. And in astrology, and kind of pertaining to mythology also, the North Node is supposed to, the North and South nodes are supposed to represent the head and the tail of a dragon. And these are supposed to be your karmic points. The South Node being where you're coming from, your past, your beliefs, your childhood, and your foundations. It's sort of like what your soul has already mastered in its previous lifetimes. Your North Node is supposed to represent where you're going. So your destiny, your purpose, your challenges, and it's almost like this innate pull into it, but you don't know, exactly what it's going to be, and you may find resistance pushing towards that destiny. So the North and South Node, like I mentioned, always falls at 0 degrees of Aries, and the South Node would be at 0 degrees of Libra. And again, that's just to kind of show a starting point, essentially, for your soul's energy. All right, so what is the importance of Draconic Astrology? So the meaning of the chart is based very closely on the moon, since the nodes create the chart. So, in a normal natal chart, the nodes are called the nodes of the moon, and it's because the nodes are determined based on where the sun meets the moon on the ecliptic. So, if you kind of imagine the orbit of the sun and the orbit of the moon, they cross at 2 points, and those become the nodes. They're always opposite of each other. They never move one faster than the other. They are always, synchronized essentially. Now, the natal chart usually focuses on your sun because the sun becomes the core essence of who you are. So you have a sun, you have a sun sign, a moon sign, rising sign. And while those things are very important, your natal chart really does focus a lot on your sun's energy. When we read horoscopes, when people ask you, what's your sign, it's always what's your sun sign. The Draconic chart, on the other hand, is really closely tied to the moon. So it's actually the inner part of you, the subconscious, that emotional aspect of you that ends up being pushed through your sun sign. And so we'll see, when we go to do our own charts, kind of how that energy is expressed. But essentially, like, I'm a Scorpio sun in this lifetime. And let's just say that my draconic sun draconic moon, is Virgo. It means that I would have these very Virgo emotions that would need to be expressed through my Scorpio sun. And we would look at how it would actually be expressed. So the Draconic chart displays our emotional responses and our inner impulses that drive our being. So it's almost like this background tape that's playing, and it's telling us to do things, or we feel like we should do things, but we don't always understand why. Like, we don't have this literal purpose that we can think of why we do things, or why we react the way we do, or why we have certain emotions towards certain things. And the Draconic chart is supposed to kind of explain that, because it really is your soul speaking through, coming through your natal chart. Okay, so let's look at some differences between the Draconic chart and the natal chart. So with the Draconic chart, everyone's north and south node is the same. So in a natal chart, when I do readings for people, I usually love to look at their north node because it tells me kind of what is driving their purpose in this lifetime. But for Draconic, everybody's north node is going to be Aries. So everybody's going to have this like spark of fire within them and this destiny to be a leader and show up authentically, because that's the north node in Aries. The south node will always be in Libra. So Libra energy brings balance, it brings harmony. So it kind of tampers down the really impulsive energy of Aries. But what house it's in is going to determine where in your life those energies manifest. Now, the houses and the aspects stay the same as the natal. So if you look at these two charts here, this is the natal chart and this is my natal chart. So I got a lot of energy going on in the first three houses. In my Draconic chart, there's still a lot of energy going on in those first three houses. And that's because the houses and the aspects stay the same. Now, one thing that was interesting is I'm an astrologer who uses whole sign house placements. So essentially what whole sign is I like all my houses to start at 0 degrees. A lot of astrologers use what's called Placidus house system, and that essentially means that the ascendant starts the houses. So whatever degree your ascendant is at, let's say it's at 5 degrees, then your first house will start at 5 degrees of whatever sign that is. Now, I'm not going to go super into that because it doesn't really matter. And if it's going over your head right now, that's totally okay. But just know that if you are into astrology and you do use whole sign house system, the houses will change a little bit when you put in your Draconic information versus your natal. And I did that. And I was like, why is this different? Because everyone says that the houses are supposed to stay the same. So I went and switched it back to Placidus, and lo and behold, it was the same. So just know that if you do this, just stick to Placidus house system. Now, the signs may or may not change. And the reason I said they may not change is because if your North Node is in Aries, like I mentioned already, then you're not going to see a very big difference because we just need to shift the North Node back to Aries at 0 degrees. But if your North Node is in Aquarius, it's going to shift a lot because we have to fast forward everything basically to 0 degrees of Aries. And so it's going to shift your signs. And I think I mentioned this, but I'll just say it again, that if your chart is very similarly reflected to your Draconic chart, so your natal chart reflects your Draconic, it essentially means that in this lifetime, your soul chose to express the fullest version of itself. So there wasn't much of a difference. Some people I read online said that if that's the case, it could be that your soul is nearing the end of its lifetimes and it's just kind of not given up on experimenting or trying new things, but it's kind of just like, well, I am who I am. I'm going to choose a lifetime that's going to express the best parts of myself, and that's just how it's going to be. Other people said that if your chart is radically different, that you could be a pretty new soul and you're just trying out new energies and new signs and kind of seeing what you like and what you don't like. And that can be very experimental and really fun. If you kind of fall somewhere in the middle, it just means, maybe you're like really trying to evolve and you're challenging yourself in different ways. Now, with the Draconic chart, its important aspects are to the moon and to the nodes. So when we go to bring our charts together, we're going to look to see if there's any conjunctions, which essentially means that the planets are right next to each other. So we'll talk about that when we get to the charts. And that is to heighten the energy. So if you look here, for example, my Saturn and my Pluto in my natal chart are both at 27 degrees. That is called a conjunction because they are literally sitting right on top of each other. And the energy of those two planets are playing with each other. They are mixing together. And depending on what planets are conjunct, will tell you if it's going to be a more beneficial energy or if it's going to be something that's a little bit harder and challenging. So we'll look at that when we go to look at your own charts. And we also want to pay attention to oppositions because the oppositions in our charts are going to show where we have challenges. So for example, an opposition is going to be something that's 180 degrees apart from each other. So for example, here, if I look at my natal chart, I have Chiron right here in Taurus. So opposite that would be something that's in Scorpio, which would be the majority of my planets down here. So Mercury, the sun, those would probably be opposite my Chiron. So I would want to look at those in my Draconic chart because it's going to show me the challenges that my soul wanted to express in this lifetime. Now with the natal chart, like I said, it's just a traditional natal chart. So your north and south node are different based on when you were born. It's a reflection of the energy of this current lifetime. And your soul chose the natal placements that it did to express its soul energy. So again, does it want a more challenging lifetime or does it want to kind of have a relaxing lifetime? We're going to find out. And then the natal chart is a more conscious expression of who you are. So it's really evident to see the energy, which is why, when people are really into astrology and they meet people and they talk to them, they're like, you must be an air sign. You're really talkative, or you're really social, or you're really friendly. It's like really easy to see once you know the signs, like who people are, because they show you. That's why it's so funny to me when people say astrology isn't real, because it's like, well, then why is it? Why is it so easy to see who is who? Because there is some validity to it. The Draconic chart, on the other hand, is more subconscious. So it's going to come through in more subtle ways. Like I said, it's kind of like a background tape running in the background to make you do things and you don't really understand why you're doing it because it's kind of on the unconscious level. All right, so creating meaning from the Draconic chart. So now we want to look at what the different planets, the points in your chart are going to represent when you start to look at your Draconic chart. So the Draconic sun is your true light and your soul essence. So similarly to your sun in your natal chart, it really does represent like how you show up in the world. It's like the light that you bring to the people around you and to the things that you do. So the sun is a very important part of the draconic chart. The most important part, though, is the moon, because your moon in your draconic chart represents your soul's desire, and it is considered the seat of the soul. So essentially, everything around you could change, but your moon will always be like the foundation of who you are in your soul's, energy. And so this is really important to know what your draconic moon sign is, because it could explain a lot about your hidden desires, your emotions, your intuition, and things like that. The draconic ascendant, or your rising sign, is the way that your soul approaches its lifetimes. Excuse me. So the ascendant in your natal chart sort of represents how people see you, how you show up, and the lens through which you view your world. It's sort of similar. So your draconic ascendant is how your soul would approach its lifetimes. So if it chose, let's say, Capricorn as your rising sign, you're someone who is going to be a very go-getter, determined kind of person. But you're also going to be very critical. And you might be someone who's maybe a little bit of like a perfectionist. So it's going to bring some positive qualities, but also some challenging qualities. If your ascendant is Cancer, you're going to be a very nurturing, very empathetic type, but you also might be overly sensitive and overly emotional. So it's just whatever your soul wanted to help it reach its evolution. And that's the ascendant it would have chosen for you. Now, the descendant is opposite the ascendant, and that would be in the 7th house, because the ascendant is the 1st house. So this would be the relationships that you seek, or the reflection of your soul. Because a lot of times what we express or how we see the world, we're looking for the counterpart of that. And it ends up being reflected back to us a lot of times in other people or the relationships that we have. So when I do natal chart readings for people, and they're trying to, a lot of times the people I do readings for own their own businesses or they're entrepreneurs, we would look at the 7th house as a way of attracting your ideal clients, because the 7th house represents the types of energies that you're looking to help balance your own energy. So again, if your rising sign is Capricorn, then the people you are seeking are Cancers, because Cancer is the opposite of Capricorn. So it helps balance out those energies, and it becomes a reflection of maybe where you could grow and where you could evolve, but also where you could show your counterpart how they can grow and how they can evolve. Now, the Draconic IC, which is the Imam Coli, and I do not speak Latin, so I probably butchered that. But that is towards the bottom of your chart. A lot of times it's either in the 3rd, the 4th, or the 5th house. And this becomes your soul's beliefs or truths. So this is the foundation of your soul. It's kind of like where all the past stuff originates. And it's also usually what your soul feels really comfortable with, really at home with. Because a lot of times the 4th house has to do with your family or your parents. So this could be kind of like your soul group, the people that you feel like you incarnate with in different lifetimes. Those are going to be the people you really depend on, or the things that you really depend on, because they are the foundation of who you are. Now, the MC, on the other hand, directly opposite that, which is the medium Coli, that is your soul's mission or purpose. So it is what you are striving to accomplish in this lifetime. So it's like this pull towards growing and evolving in a certain sense that's going to just help you like magnetize yourself to people or inspire people in some way, or to be of service. It's something that you're going to be known for. So that is what your MC is going to represent. Now, moving into the planets. So your Draconic Mercury is how your soul communicates through to you, or how you input information. So I was pretty surprised by this, because I was like, oh, I feel like if it's the way your soul communicates through you, I feel like that would be like Neptune, which it can be, because Neptune rules your dreams. But I thought this was really interesting, because whatever sign your Draconic Mercury falls into, it's probably a really good way of how your higher self communicates to you in this lifetime. So if you're ever one of those people that's like, oh, I feel like I never hear from my higher self or my guides or whatever, it could be maybe because you're trying to do it in a way that doesn't quite match up with your Draconic Mercury. So it'll be interesting to see if that changes for you once you know what your Draconic Mercury is. Now, Draconic Venus is how you feel loved and how you show love, and also your values. So it's all the things that you essentially find pleasing and beautiful and harmonious to your soul. Draconic Mars is your passion and what gets you excited. So wherever we find Mars, it's going to be what lights up your soul, what makes it feel like it wants to reincarnate and live human lifetimes, because it can't get those same type of pleasures as a soul just living in the consciousness. So the Mars is going to represent what gets you excited. Draconic Jupiter is your spiritual connection, exploring and learning. So this is everything that like gets your soul excited about growth and expansion. So, you know, when it comes down for its lifetimes, what is it looking forward to learning about? What kinds of knowledge is it welcoming, and does it want to, you know, connect with and find other people to share in that wisdom? Draconic Saturn is your soul's structure and what restricts it, and also your karma. So just like in your natal chart, Saturn is the planet of conservation, maturity, and responsibility. And for Draconic Saturn, it really is like kind of the parameters that you put around your lifetimes to kind of keep it on track. Because your soul never wants to waste a lifetime. You know, it wants to grow and it wants to evolve. So Saturn kind of helps remind you of the lessons that maybe you set for yourself before you incarnated, and helps build that structure so that you can live out whatever it is that you set out to do. Draconic Uranus is your soul's originality and its quirks. So kind of what sets you apart in each of your lifetimes. It's the special thing that you bring to your lifetimes that maybe when you meet other people in your soul group, they recognize that about you. Or maybe it's just something that all of you guys share together and it becomes something that bonds you. I was thinking about this as I was typing up these notes about how, you know, a lot of times if we have kids or if we have like a best friend, that it's like we just know they came from a past life. And to me, it kind of feels like that might be the Uranus showing through, where your soul recognizes a quirk or something in another soul, and that's what brings the two of you together to remember that both of you came from the same soul group. And then Draconic Neptune is your hidden shadows. And this is kind of like your connection to spirit, but also what you do in your life that sort of maybe self-sabotages yourself. Because Neptune can bring a lot of intuition and open you up, but it also, on the other side, shows you your shadows and where you lack. And so this can be kind of one of those planetary energies that either helps build you up or kind of destroys you a little bit. And so obviously shadow work is always a part of the, you know, equation when we're doing healing. And so the Neptune will kind of show you maybe where in your life you tend to hold on to secrets or you tend to self-sabotage. And lastly, Draconic Pluto is your personal power, your healing abilities, and taboo traits. So Pluto, being the planet of transformation, shows you where you can better yourself, where you can challenge yourself to be authentically you. And it's not always going to come very easy, because Pluto dismantles and destroys things in order to bring about the beautiful side of you. So I like to think of Pluto as like when a diamond is being, you know, born. It undergoes so much pressure, you know, being in the Earth's core or whatever, all the fire and everything that's kind of just fusing the minerals together, and then out pops a beautiful diamond. And it's the same thing. Your Draconic Pluto is showing you where you still have some room left to grow, where you still have some refining and some polishing left so that you can basically shine as the most beautiful version of yourself. All right, so that is the background and everything behind the Draconic chart. We are going to do all of these steps together. So I am going to change my screen. And if you are able to do this at the same time that I am, if you have a phone next to you or if you can split a screen or whatever, you can absolutely do that. If you can't, then just continue watching. You can write down the steps or take a screenshot of this if you need to. And then we can do it after I show you how to look at your chart. Okay? And day, I know it is almost 3 o'clock for you, or no, 2 o'clock for you. Sorry, I know you're an hour behind me. So if you do need to leave, take a screenshot of this really quick if you want, so that way you can do it on your own. And then we'll move on with Ani and Angela. Okay, before I go into looking at the chart, are there any questions?
For the descriptions that you had, or no, thank you for going over it, by the way. The descriptions that you had for all the planets and the houses, would you say that what you described is different if this was the natal chart version of like everything?
I would say it could be interpreted very similarly. Because it essentially is another chart of yourself, but instead of representing maybe just this one glimpse of a lifetime, it's maybe sort of showing you a pattern because it's your soul's energy. So it should be showing you kind of like maybe in certain lifetimes where you always do certain things or you always act a certain way, because it'll kind of repeat itself, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense, but I would interpret it similarly, but also knowing that your Draconic chart is going to be more of like your soul's energy and how that pushes through each of your individual lifetimes. Does that make sense?
I see, thank you. It does, yeah.
Okay.
It's like these are the same qualities, but soul versus outward expression. And sorry, one last question.
Yeah.
For the when you mentioned like for example Uranus, like how like one soul like can maybe notice a quirk in another and like feel attracted to them, et cetera, for like that type of stuff. Would you say that like what what draws someone to another sign in this case? Is like are they looking more towards like their draconic sign in the other person or the natal sign, or it doesn't really matter, it's more of just like any quality of seeing that specific like yeah, that specific sign?
That's such a good question. And to be honest, I'm not too sure. I guess it could be essentially both. Because I know, like, before I knew Draconic Astrology, obviously, like with my son's chart and stuff, I would look at his chart and I'd just be like, yeah, I absolutely know without a doubt he's been a part of my lifetimes, previous lifetimes before. But I could also just feel that from his energy too. Like, I wished for him, I manifested him. Like, I just know he's been with me in certain lifetimes. But astrologically, I feel like it could work for both. Like, you could probably look at someone's natal chart and just be like, yeah, I can see how our lives were meant to come together or something, or I just feel that you were a part of my soul group. But I bet you could also look at the Draconic too and maybe see similarities, because when I talked about this on my TikTok a few months ago, I had people comment about, one girl in particular commented and said that her Draconic chart was almost exactly her mom's natal chart. And she said that her and her mom are like best friends. So it was really interesting because I was like, wow, that is interesting, because if your soul is choosing the time and place and everything for you to be born, to have the natal chart that it wants you to have in order to live out the lessons it wants you to have, then it would make sense sometimes if like you are reincarnating with certain people from your soul group and you guys are kind of sharing energies, you know? Does that help? I don't know if that
That's
answers
super
your
cool.
question.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I love your questions. They're so insightful. But yeah, it is something to think about. And like I said, this is a very recent form of astrology. I think there's a few people on Google who have said that it's an ancient form of astrology. And, you know, I'm not here to say like whether it is or it isn't. But there's a lot of people that have said that this originated basically because someone was doing some type of interpretation for a chart and ended up stumbling upon this in some weird way and ended up just naming it Draconic Astrology, and then it kind of took off. So there really isn't a ton of information out there as far as like people doing readings of it or really like deep diving into all the interpretations. So I think if it's a fairly new study, I mean, take whatever kind of like resonates with you and just go with it, because that's been like the big theme I think with doing spiritual stuff is, you know, it's kind of up to your own interpretation of like what resonates and what doesn't, you know. And it's not really for me to say like, oh yeah, this is, you know, whatever, I know it all and you know nothing. Like, I'm definitely not that type of person, and I'm always very open to um you know, people's interpretations and stuff. So you should see the AstroSeek website here. So I am going to scroll down a little bit. Once you get to the astro-seek.com website, you'll see they have all types of charts. This is one of my favorite sites that if you are looking for any type of astrology chart, and it's free, you know, they have everything here that you could ever want. If you want to do any kind of forecasting, predictive astrology, like solar returns, progressions, they're all here. And so you'll come down here to where it says branches of astrology. You're going to click on the one that says Draconic Astrology. So when you click on that, it's going to bring you to the calculator so that you can input your birth information. And I use my chart all the time, so it's not going to be a secret that you guys see this. So I'm going to put in my birthday, which is November 8th, 1982. I was born at 3:06. And I was born in Chula Vista, California. Okay, and then like I said, if you were to click here on extended settings, you would see where you could change the house system. You could add in Lilith if you wanted. If you wanted to use the true lunar nodes rather than the mean lunar nodes, which I won't get into and explain because it's just a little bit more advanced and we don't really need that, but you can change that if you want. If you want to change aspects to any of the asteroids or anything, or put in minor aspects, if you're super advanced, you can absolutely do all that, but we're just going to leave this alone. And we're going to click Calculate Chart. So once the chart is calculated, you're going to be presented with a couple of different options. So first thing that we're going to look at, and the first thing that you'll want to note, is where your sun is, where your moon is, and where your new rising sign is, if it's changed at all. So like I said originally, I'm a Scorpio sun, a Leo moon, and a Libra rising. In my Draconic Astrology, I am now a Leo sun, my moon is in Taurus, and my Libra is Gemini. Such completely different energies. And so when you find that out for a minute, you might be shocked, you might be excited. It might resonate super deeply if you're already really into astrology and you know stuff about it, or you might not know anything yet, and we'll kind of get into that when we look at your charts. It is very interesting for me, and I actually laughed so loud when I saw my Draconic chart and that I was a Leo sun, because growing up, I always used to hate Leos. I always thought they were so just like troublemakers, rebellious. They're so loud. They're just like always, look at me, look at me. And come to find out, I have a Leo moon, and my Draconic sun is Leo. So I have a lot of Leo energy, and it always ends up happening that the things that you don't like in others are usually reflections of the things you don't like in yourself. And so it's been a very healing journey to now be studying astrology and going through and looking at how Leo plays a part in my energy. And I love it now. I love having a Leo moon. And even more now that my soul's sun energy is Leo, which is really fun. So So once you have your 3 figured out, you'll want to write those down and we'll go through them. Now, the next thing that we want to do is we want to look at any conjunctions or any oppositions within our draconic chart. And so for me here, I've got a couple of conjunctions here between the Sun and Jupiter. And then I've got a conjunction here between Mars and the South Node. So these are going to give me some ideas of maybe where there's going to be some energy that's really boosted, and also possibly where there's going to be any challenges or things that I'm going to need to focus on or learn about with my soul energy. And so for me, I've got Saturn, Pluto conjunct, I've got Sun and Jupiter conjunct, also Venus, and I've got Mars conjunct my South Node here. So if I were to break apart each of these things, I'll just take one, for example. So let's do Mars with the South Node. So I would need to think about, what does Mars represent? What do I know about Mars? And looking back at our slides, we know that Mars represents our passions, our inner drive, the things that we're really excited about and that light us up. I know that the South Node represents my beliefs, my truths, where I was coming from, my foundations, possibly even my soul family, soul group, and kind of like what I already feel pretty comfortable with, like what I feel like my soul has maybe already mastered and evolved into. So when I put those two energies together, it can tell me that maybe I feel very inspired, very passionate about talking about or sharing where I've come from, because it's just barely in the 3rd house. It's almost going into the 4th house, so it's going to have some 4th house family themes, but the 3rd it's still technically in the 3rd house, and 3rd house is communication. So it does mean that I like, or I find passion or inspiration in being able to talk about, past lives, karma, and your beliefs and truths, and really like challenging those, I guess. And if I were to apply that to this lifetime, to how I feel in this lifetime, that does sort of resonate. I honestly don't like living in the past. I do think about it a lot though, because I do think it's shaped a lot of who I am in this lifetime. But it's not something I like to totally talk about. But in my soul's energy, it is something that has made me, or made my soul who it is. Like maybe my past lifetimes were, maybe they were really challenging. Maybe I spent a lot of time with my soul group because it's close to the 4th house, and it's hard for me to branch out and be alone. So maybe there's always this like background theme running through my life where I'm afraid of being abandoned, which actually does make sense because I'm adopted in this lifetime. And I have a lot of, I guess I'll say, mommy issues. I don't know. I have a lot of issues with like feeling loved and feeling like I was wanted. And that could be kind of part of that background energy that's running from my soul and pushing itself through in this lifetime. I hope that makes sense. So that's just kind of like one interpretation that I could make about my draconic energy. Now, if we go into the big points of the chart, which would be the rising sign, the descendant, the what do you call it? The IC and the midheaven. So this is going to tell me that Gemini, being my rising sign, social, friendly, outgoing, loves to get, groups of people together, very approachable, possibly even a little bit flaky or aloof, and that is very interesting to me because I don't really get along with Geminis very much in this lifetime. I feel like most Geminis that I've come into contact with, that I've been friends with, it's an okay friendship, but it feels superficial. And I like depth, at least in this lifetime, which is probably why I chose to be a Scorpio. And so to me, it feels very superficial on the surface. But when I think about it as my soul's energy, maybe that was part of a challenge that I wanted for myself, is that as a soul, I am pretty superficial. I am, kind of life the party fun and, sociable or whatever. I don't need to have maybe deep connections with people. Maybe. But in this lifetime, maybe I wanted to try that out. Maybe I wanted to see what it would be like to have things be a little bit deeper, a little bit more, empathetic with other people and feel that connection. So it chose for me to be a Scorpio. And also for the fact that it placed my moon in the 11th house, which has to do with groups of people. So it's just kind of it's a way to show me how the energy is maybe manifesting into this lifetime. And then that would make the energy on my descendant would be Sagittarius, because that would be the opposite of Gemini. So the types of people that I'm seeking out, or the reflections that I'm looking for in people, are Sagittarian energy. So, really expansive and knowledgeable and full of wisdom and maybe a little bit blunt. Somebody that can challenge me. And honestly, that makes total sense in this lifetime, because just like I don't really get along with Geminis very well, I also don't really get along with Sagittarians. I had a lot of Sagittarian energy in my life, same with Gemini, and it always seems that those end up being the people I burn bridges with. And I'm being very real about this, so just so you guys can kind of get a feel for how to interpret your own chart. And so, the Sagittarian is kind of maybe showing a reflection of like my soul's energy, but when compared to my Scorpio energy, I just don't like it. It rubs me the wrong way. And so again, it could be a little challenge that I gave to myself. And that's why I keep getting Geminis and Sagittarians put into my life to kind of reflect back to me, who I truly am as a soul. And then diving into the IC, so that's kind of like past beliefs, where I'm coming from. We already kind of talked about that. And it is technically in the 3rd house. So it is, probably something where very good at communicating. I do feel a very deep resonance with being a teacher and talking and sharing knowledge and things like that with people. So this comes very naturally to me. This feels very true to who I am. And that would make sense, because it is supposed to be kind of what you feel comfortable with. Whereas my North Node, which would be at the 0 degrees of Aries for everyone, but it being in the 9th house, almost going into the 10th house, really is kind of just showing like that is what I'm moving towards as a soul. My soul is moving towards infinite wisdom, infinite education, huge expansion, huge exploration, and leading, maybe being like a spiritual guru type of person. And maybe, it is actually really funny when I think about it, because I did a quantum healing hypnosis technique session back in October of last year. And one of the things that I was told from my higher self was that on the other side, I am like a teacher soul, that I help younger groups of souls choose which lifetimes to incarnate into, and kind of sharing life lessons and wisdom and things. And now seeing this, that totally makes sense, because that's kind of what the 9th house is all about, is really expanding your beliefs and sharing knowledge and, kind of helping others evolve and explore in their lifetimes. So that's really cool, but it's also a little bit unfamiliar too, because the North Node is supposed to represent where you're going, but you don't know exactly how you're going to get there or what tools you're going to need. You just kind of feel this drive to do it. And so it's kind of uncharted waters up here. And then, like I mentioned, the most important thing you want to look at in your draconic chart is your moon sign. So for me, my new moon sign is Taurus. And this took a while for me to really kind of cement into, because I love Taurus. Taurus is the opposite of Scorpio. So I do understand the Taurus energy pretty well, I would say. Having my moon here, it does make a lot of sense, because I love comfort. I love stability. I love to depend on people if I need to. I am super stubborn, resistant to change. I don't like surprises. You know, I like things to be aesthetically pleasing and, I don't know, I have certain ways of doing things, so the Taurus energy really makes sense. And when I think about that as my soul's energy, I can absolutely see how that shows up in this lifetime. I love food in this lifetime. I really struggle with my weight, which can be kind of a more challenging aspect for Taurus people. And that's kind of a forefront, I guess, focus of this lifetime. I love artwork and I love beautiful things and pleasing things. I've never really felt at home anywhere until I finally moved to Arizona. And now I kind of finally feel like I can put roots down. And that's a very Taurus thing, is they're an earth sign. So they need that dependability or stability of a comfortable space. And I finally feel like I'm getting that. So that's probably that Taurus energy finally coming through for me, which I'm very thankful for. So it makes sense. It's a little challenging, I think, when I recognize my sun as Leo, because I do feel a lot of that boisterous, very lively energy, whereas this is a lot slower, this is a lot calmer. But it's also kind of reflective of how I am in this lifetime too, because my sun is Scorpio and my moon is Leo. So it's like I understand both sides, how to be quieter and in the shadows, but also be the shining light. And it's kind of reflected the same way in my soul's energy also. So it kind of makes me think that my soul probably likes being on stage, but also behind the stage, if that makes sense. So it's kind of interesting. Let's go back and take a look at your charts.